Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here today with my friend Chris, and we are getting together to talk about Jim Butcher's recent short story collection, Brief Cases. Hello.
Hello.
So, I would like to. I'm going to try to stick to this, and I'll maybe I'll put a note in when we get to the on the show description when we get to the spoilerish territory. I'd like to stick to the more general, like non-spoiler discussion for a while, and then like at some point, okay, free for all, and if you're worried about spoilers, stop here. So um, before I go, Chris, did you have any overall impressions?
Overall, I really enjoyed them. Seeing from different characters' points of views was very nice. And just being able to sort of see stuff that happened when Harry wasn't there is always kind of fun. Just sort of builds up the universe a little bit more.
Yeah, and that reminds me, of course, uh, all all material prior to this book, like that spoilers are unmarked, as they would say on TV tropes. That will show up because there's at this point there's no way to talk about these stories meaningfully without you know letting slip some of that stuff. Anyway, but yeah, whew, it's fascinating. They did seeing other points of view, um, which he did in the first collection, which was Side Jobs.
Correct.
Yeah. And he did that in Side Jobs, but if I remember correctly, there were only two stories there from someone else's point of view. It was from Thomas's,
And one
um,
from Murphy.
right. Whereas this one, uh, and I also think that's one of the best features of this short story collection because, like, you have from Anastasia Lucio, you have from the point of view of Johnny Marcone,
That
which,
was nice.
yes, that was interesting. You have two from the point of view of Molly, um, before and after she becomes a fairy queen. So, um, and uh, let's see. Oh, right. Waldo Butters. There's one from Waldo Butters.
Yep.
And then there's a half of another one that I feel like talking about that in detail would kind of be a spoiler in itself. I'll
Yeah, because they
say
kind of spring that on you partway through.
right. So I'm gonna leave that one alone until later. But yeah, I enjoyed that also. Was there anything? Were there any other overall things for you?
Uh, I believe in the series he's mentioned meeting Bigfoot before.
Right.
So it was pretty cool finally be able to actually see what happened there.
Yeah, and it was kind of odd because the other thing with these is that um, for the most part these stories were written just one by one for this project, that project, and then he just kind of put them all together here. This wasn't done as a single unified project, but you have three stories featuring Bigfoot and a yeah, that's not really spoiler. It's revealed pretty quickly. A half Bigfoot, half human, and seeing the progression, that progression through time. So that was kind of cool. Um, One thing I found really, geez, I have a lot of. Okay, so one thing I found really interesting is I actually, like I said, this is a set of disparate stories. They were produced over a significant period of time, and there wasn't really any plan. But I actually see a kind of a theme running through a lot of them, which was somewhat surprising to me. Um, I wonder whether you would care to take a guess. Do you see anything similar, or Whether you care to put in something in before I tell you what I see.
Well, the Bigfoot one, whenever you compare that with like the last one, Zoo Day, there's sort of a parental aspect.
There's that, yes. Oh,
And then there, well, even if you go into the one where Molly is already the the winter
lady.
maiden, or yeah, the winter lady.
Yeah.
Like even there, there's a sort of parental relationship there. It's just kind of messed up, and you can kind of see that with Harry's godmother, who's kind of a mother figure to her in a weird way. So
Well, I
that
mean, she is the Winter Mother, so yeah.
so
It's
that, that
just
that's a good like five or so of them that sort of deal with parental figures in some way.
okay. So that wasn't the one I saw, and I'm gonna put my thing forward, and I'll see what you think. It seems to me that a lot of them, a lot of the stories share a theme of basically sometimes you have to do it on your own. Sometimes it's just you and there's not backup and it's you and you alone. Sometimes that's the way things are. Um, and the other thing I find kind of interesting about that is very much in contrast to a lot of what goes on in the novels. Because what tends to happen, at least in the more recent ones, a lot of the novels, there's a kind of an emphasis on teamwork, on we stick together and like you find the people to help you do the job right. But in this one, like I said, a lot of them seem to share this idea of sometimes you got to do it by yourself. Sometimes it's just you, and even looking for help is a mistake.
I can definitely see that.
Because there's and I at this general level, I don't think there's spoilers. Like the first Bigfoot story, absolutely, that's what's going on there. There's let's see. There's the first Bigfoot story. There's one
Well,
of. Go ahead.
well, even the first story, A Fistful of Warlocks, Lucio's just kind of there, where she does kind of have to team up with someone, but for the most part, she's going into this situation by herself. She doesn't realize there's going to be any aid.
Yeah, well, and it's in that one. It's not so much of a kind of moral decision, though. That one, it just seems like practical necessity threw her into that. Whereas in like B is for Bigfoot in Cold Case, and in Day One, and in Zoo Day, all of those have that idea going on there, and it's kind of fascinating seeing like a weird sort of emergent theme from things that shouldn't, from things that you wouldn't think were done, that was done deliberately.
Well, I feel like one of the good things about Jim Butcher is he sort of keeps that sort of stuff in mind. Because even just in general, you get to stuff in some of the later books, and it's like he must have been planning this for like at least half the series. Uh, and then in sort of the notes from here, like you find out, well, he actually wasn't necessarily planning that, but he must have had some idea what he was going for, like specifically the sort of thing with Butters, where apparently he was introduced just sort of as like a one-time character, but his appearance there sort of enabled Jim Butcher to turn it into something much bigger later on. So
Yeah, and in terms of like characters in the series, like in terms of secondary characters in the series, like following the progression of Butters has been pretty interesting and weird, in a good way. Weird in a good way.
Right. So I think he's pretty good at sort of finding ways, even if he's not specifically planning for it, recognizing stuff in what he's written and finding ways to like pull it out later and emphasize it in further stories.
Okay, so and here's where I'm going to make some people angry. But there was one thing that kind of annoyed me. It popped up a couple times in this story about this collection, and there's a little bit of this in Jim Butcher's work in general. And the thing that kind of annoyed me here was the yay single moms and these, tough-minded, independent single moms who would do anything for their kids. And it really bothers me because it's like it's a very common message in our culture, and I think it's immensely destructive. And it kind of bothers me to see an artist I like promoting that kind of idea. So,
well, there's a difference between promoting the situation and focusing on someone doing the best with the situation they're in.
Yeah, but I like in this one. There's the Bigfoot stories, and there's in what is it, 4A Wizardry or AAAA Wizardry? I don't know how you would say that title, but and the stories both with significantly involving single mothers.
At the same time, from a narrative point of view, for Harry to have a role in those stories, it kind of has to be like that.
Yeah, but there's...
And even in the Bigfoot one, even though, the mother is very loving, she's not even always around.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe there's a little more, if you dig a little deeper, there's a little more narrative criticism than I had thought about before. But it's still, like I said, it'll make people mad me saying this. Single motherhood is an immensely destructive influence on our culture, and I hate seeing people talk about it as neutral, as positive, which it seems to me is in some of this. So, and having dropped that little bomb, I think I've covered most of the things. Well, I think for me, I've covered most of the things I wanted to say about the general, pre-spoiler part. Was there anything else you wanted to throw in?
Yeah, no, I'm ready to jump into some of these more specifically.
Okay, so warning, if you have not read Briefcases yet, we are going to be entering spoiler territory now, and you may want to stop and come back afterwards. Or if you don't care about spoilers, just stick around and enjoy the talk. So, I will say, well, would you like to go through story by story, or did you want to just talk about individual points, or what?
We can just sort of take the highlights.
I will say, because this is, I made a series of notes when I was reading this, and one thing that I very much liked in the story, the story Bombshells, which is one of the Molly Carpenter stories. Molly does not repeat Susan Rodriguez's mistake. And because that's one thing that's annoyed me for a long time with this series, because I read it a little bit out of order, and so there's Harry beating himself up for the longest time. Well, I mean, still is, but Harry beating himself up for what happened to Susan Rodriguez. And then I end up going back and reading that story, and I'm like, no, no, Harry, this was not you. She was stupid. She should not have done that, and it has nothing to do with you. And so, they need to, get into this event that is on the property of the Spartel,
Svartelves.
yes, Spartelves. Um, and someone was like, "Well, we could just break in," and I'm always like, "No, no, we don't. Bad plan." So I was happy to see that. And did you notice that connection also, or
I did, and I like the way they went with it because sneaking in's a bad plan, but even sort of like tricking your way in isn't isn't a good idea either. You're safe for that time, but then you've kind of created an enemy if you do anything they don't like. Whereas they kind of just went a very direct route. What do the Svart elves like? They like beautiful things. Let's just make ourselves look as beautiful as possible, and they'll just invite us in.
well, I mean, you could say they tricked their way
Well,
in the
they
same way that women in general are tricking men all the time.
right, but
Attractive women can get quite a bit out of men. So
right, but it's like it's not like they weren't actually beautiful and like
yeah, yeah,
we're hiding anything. Like they didn't really have to make any claims about why they were there that would have like caused that big of a deal. It's like that was a solid plan.
um, so uh, I think it'll be easier just to if we just go through this fistful of warlocks. What do you think? Any high points, low points?
That was a fun one. Weird thinking of it's weird thinking of the sort of time scales because I know that wizards live that long,
Right, but
but
you
up
haven't previously seen what that means.
right up until that point, we've really only been from like Harry's professional career. I think in side jobs we kind of got a glimpse of his first case, but still, that's been a very sort of narrow time frame.
Right. And it's one other thing, and it's one other thing I think about that, and it's obvious, not in a bad way, like obvious solution in a good way. Um, but he wanted to place this story, sometime in the past. Um, and okay, I'll take one of these other characters. Well, who were they fighting against? Well, we know something that has been a significant problem for the White Council for some time. And that would be wait. Oh crud! I lost his name. The word of Kemmler.
Kimmler, yeah.
Yeah, hunting Kemmler. Hunting Kemmler was a problem for them for a long time, and so okay, he and some of his minions are going to be the bad guy, and that's a really good way to a really good way to get into that story. I liked that approach.
And even putting it in the Old West, like they're specifically going to a sort of like lawless place.
Right.
Uh, yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was neat getting a glimpse there. It sort of expanded the universe a little bit, but at the same time, it was more of a fun diversion than anything else. It didn't move like the main plot of the world further like some of the other stories did. It was just a neat little story.
So there's B is for Bigfoot, which I think two things I liked about that story. There's well, how do you handle bullies? Okay, and he says, no, you can't just keep letting them do this and do this and do this. It's going to get much worse. And I can't actually like the other thing was even if Harry could, even if there wasn't the other interfering factor, if Harry tried to fix this, well, Harry's not going to be there forever.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, there's this idea. Sometimes you got to do it yourself, and in this case, sometimes you got to say, "No, you have to stop. This is unacceptable," and show them that you can put some punch behind that.
And it was also an opportunity for Harry to win the day sort of through cleverness,
Yes.
because it wasn't something that he could just like throw like pure like magical fury at or anything.
Well,
Like it could have been a bad situation had he tried to get directly involved, but he actually worked it out in such a way as not only did he complete his mission, but he also kind of did a favor for the other side as well.
well, and the other thing, and it's not so much a question of cleverness, because I think Harry can be, like in the other stories, we've seen Harry Dresden be, very clever about setting things up. I think the word I put on this one was subtlety, because Harry can be clever, but he's not often subtle. It's more often explosions and people flying through the air. So, um, but
Yeah, it is interesting seeing him keep the peace between factions instead of just making the situation worse.
instead of starting a war. Um,
Right.
let's see another. The next one. Anything else on that one?
Not particularly. I mean, we'll be coming back to the characters. So.
Yeah. For a wizardry, one thing I liked here, and this shows up later on in the series, later on in this short story collection, that Harry has not addressed before, is the idea that magic can operate differently involving children than adults. And that shows up later in these stories, and we'll get to that one. And I'm kind of wondering whether he's going to try to work that into the novels too, because what he does that in this story, and especially in Zoo Day, a little bit in Day One too. But what he does with that is kind of interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if he means to do anything bigger with that, or if it's just sort of a side part. Because for that, I feel like you would have to have a child be the protagonists. Like you would have to see it from their point of view, because it would be rough. Like this is more falling into Zoo Day stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But you would really need a kid to either be the protagonist, see it from their point of view, or have them admit a bunch of stuff that's going to make them sound crazy.
Yeah, it's. I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting going forward, looking at that and seeing how that goes. What else was there with that one? Oh, and also, of course, just the idea of Harry, like leading a class and trying to actually be not just a mentor, like one-on-one, because that's more of a familiar, more of a personal thing. But be a teacher in front of a class. That's a kind of interesting and fun idea.
Well,
I don't. Go ahead.
Well, it does also put into context like exactly how bad things had gotten in the war at that point, because the White Council, as a general rule, like they don't think very highly of Harry Dresden. A lot of people don't particularly trust him. He's kind of the whole reason why they're in this war to begin with. But they're in a position where they have no choice but to have him teach, because when it comes down to it, he's one of the most effective wizards they have that they can actually spare to do this.
Well, and it's what was the? I can't keep the novel straight. There's Grave Peril is the first one that featured the undead, and Deadbeat was the one where Sue shows up.
Right.
And in Deadbeat is the other one where you see that kind of a moment of, oh, this is how badly this is going for us right now, isn't it? So yeah, it's that, and that is interesting. It's another indication of that. So there was one of the stories, and it's one of the novels I've only read once. I've read a few of them twice. There's one of the novels I only read once where Harry is like part of like kind of a wizard training summer camp. I don't know what's the right word here. Do you and some what is it? Some ghouls kidnap a couple of their wizards. Which one is it's? That's like kind of the back part of the flashback in that one. I can't remember which one.
Yeah, I don't remember specifically.
Is it turn? I don't know. Anyway, but so you saw a little bit of this, but a little bit of that before. But it's
Well, and you also see a little bit with Ramirez and some of the newer wardens how they treat Harry.
right. And it's kind of like what you said about the difference in timescales when we were talking about the first story. It's kind of difficult to really think of how, like the what would you call it? Like how an organization like that would work when there are people, the people who are in leadership can be as much as 300 years old, and it's like obviously that will have some advantages and probably has significant disadvantages too. And so it's interesting to think about that kind of thing in the books. Anything else on that one?
I don't think so.
I was a teenage Bigfoot. Go.
This one, it was a lot of fun in and of itself, and it also sort of set up the next Bigfoot story in a way. But yeah, it was. I like the idea of sort of taking the parts of your universe that you've come up with, like, hey, mythical creatures can sometimes have kids with humans, and then you have sort of like a half breed, and it's like, okay, what are some of the ramifications of this? And in this one, it's like, yeah, they're like, Irwin has a lot of like inherent magic. Okay, anybody that can recognize that, they're going to try to use that, and that's something I don't think I would have thought of if I was just sort of trying to work out what would happen. But yeah, that somebody's going to see him as a source of power and try to exploit that.
Well, and the other thing, and he does this a little bit for humorous effect in the story, but it's also kind of weird because the headmaster or dean or whatever his position is, like he's exploiting Irwin's life energy basically to attempt to regrow his hair, and it's like such a petty, almost childish reason to do something like this, but at the same time, that's kind of how human beings actually are. We can do really stupid and dangerous things for petty and silly reasons. And it's...
Yeah, just because you happen to know that the magical world exists doesn't mean you're like automatically a rational person. In fact, it's probably the irrational people that have kind of more of a chance to figure it out to begin with.
Well, and it's not even so much a question of rationality. It's just like I said, we don't all. It doesn't matter how smart you are. Everyone will have moments where you don't think through the consequences, and you just kind of gotta hope that when you hit one of those moments, it's not one of the ones with lifelong consequences. It's not one of the ones that will wreck you. It'll be one of the ones that just maybe batter you up a little bit. Um, let's see. And I was a teenage Bigfoot. Well, and it's also, and you've seen this some in the novels. It's also kind of interesting there to see Harry throwing around basically his warden authority a little bit, and because in terms of the novels, there was actually a relatively short space where that was happening, because he was made a warden, and then like 3 or 4 books later, oh, now you're dead. Okay, we got you, and then you're back, and now you're not a warden anymore because I don't think the White Council wants the Winter Knight as a warden.
Yeah, that. Although the thing about it is, they were sort of allies in the war, so I'm not sure the White Council and the whole like sort of Fae thing. That's a whole political thing right there. So it almost wouldn't surprise me if it was more the Winter Court that didn't want their champion to have mixed allegiances.
Is Harry? That's one thing I'm not actually. Is Harry still a part of the White Council? I'm
Yeah,
not actually sure. I don't know if that's been addressed. It's going to be. I'm sure. Another
and
thing
that would also, well, could like the question of like where Molly stands is also a bit weird.
well, they're not going to kill her anytime soon. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But the other thing with sorry, and this isn't from this set of books. The other thing from the Dresden Files that like someday this is going to happen, and I really am curious how that plays out. Is at some point, Dresden and Kincaid are going to cross paths again, and that's going to be a strange conversation.
Yeah, that could go a few different ways. I mean, I could see Harry being really upset that like he paid for a job and Kincaid failed. Like, I want my money back, okay?
I didn't think of that. Although, I mean, Kincaid only failed because of the interference of the Winter Court, so I don't know. I hadn't considered that. Though. I don't know if most hitmen offer money back guarantees. Although, considering he thought he was killing his customer, maybe he did because there's going to be no one to get it. I was a teenage Bigfoot. Anything else on that one?
I think that about covers
it. Curses. Which I've read through these stories twice now because I read them. I got finished rather earlier than you did, and I had to refresh my memory before we did this. But I actually completely forgot about this one after the first read, mostly probably because I don't care about baseball.
I'm kind of in the same boat as you there. I did think it was pretty funny though, the sort of moral of just like enjoying the game like for itself, and that reminded me of the one G.K. Chesterton story.
I was gonna bring that one up as well. Oh crud! I should have looked up the title of that one. In fact, I might do that. But yeah, there's a G.K. Chesterton essay where he talks about it's the people who consistently lose at a game and still play it who are the people who actually love the game. The people who play the game and win, well, they like winning. And so, like, they're not motivated by the game itself. They're motivated by the winning. But if you lose and you lose and you lose and you still play the game, it's clear that you love the game itself. And so it is, it was interesting seeing that basically in a more fictionalized form.
Yeah, and I think overall it was just one of the stories where it was a fun read, and it kind of expanded the universe a little bit, but it didn't necessarily like move anything forward.
Uh, Even hand.
Now that's it's probably my favorite one in this whole thing.
It
It
is, yeah. It especially in terms of like, hey, let's look at this from someone else's point of view. Okay, how about a? I don't even know what to. And Nemesis. I don't know what to call Marcone because they've worked as allies several times. But Harry's also made it clear someday I'm coming for you. And so it's a weird, um, it's a very strange relationship.
and
But
and though he's like definitely a criminal and like he really should be in jail, you also don't want Marcone taken out in any way because anything that would take his spot would be so much worse.
evil power vacuum, yes, that's a thing.
And as bad as he is, like he does have morals that he holds himself and everyone under him to. So
Although
so yeah, it's like again, anyone else would be so much worse.
it's also funny, and this was something I noticed the second time through. Like, okay, his what you call like TV tropes would call it, pet the dog thing, revealing some level of decency and honor even in the bad guy, and his kind of pet the dog thing is you know we don't hurt kids and we don't use kids, um, and that's his major redeeming quality. And then in this story, there's this one line that makes even that freaking creepy. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't think I do.
Okay, so what's her Lara? Is it Lara? Am I getting
Uh,
the name wrong?
Laura Wraith is
Okay,
the
so yes,
head of that court.
oh shoot, the girl. What's her name? Thomas's girlfriend.
Let's see.
Starts with a J. I am obviously
Justine.
Justine. There we go. I am
Yes.
obviously well prepared for this discussion. Um, but Justine comes and she's bringing this child with her, and asks for protection, and Marcone kind of comments to himself like inside his own inner monologue kind of thing. Oh, they are all beautiful at that age. I'm like, oh no, like that there are people who could say that, but somehow coming from him, it's like, oh, you're worrying me. So
I I don't necessarily get a weird like bad vibe off of that.
I don't think it's
So
any. Go
so
ahead.
much so much as he just sees. I don't know. He just seems to have such a respect for sort of like childhood and innocence because he knows what he's doing. He knows who he is, and he's not going to apologize for it. But he's not necessarily going to try to like force that on people.
Yeah,
So
well,
I think he sort of sees children as being like inherently innocent and sort of like I think that means a lot to him, which is why he has such an issue with people corrupting children in any way.
yeah, and I didn't take that as like sexual pedophile anything like that. That wasn't how I read it. But like when I read that line, I'm like, oh, that feels weird. But what else did you have on this one? Anything?
Just overall, just seeing how prepared he was, you can't it's really hard to phase him. Whatever you throw at him, he's pretty much prepared for, or he's at least like determined previously that this is a possibility. So
Uh,
whatever happens, he's more or less ready for it, or he's going to play it off as if he was ready for it.
so basically, he's the dark reflection of Batman in the Dresden Files.
In a very real way, he is, and
Yeah,
he surrounds himself with people who are very capable, and he just implicitly trusts that they're going to be able to handle their side of things.
right.
Uh, so it's like watching a well functioning machine just do its thing perfectly. And that in itself is fun. But then at the end, whenever you realize, wait, all of this is aimed against one specific individual, and that showdown's coming. Like
Now the other. Go ahead.
that's
Sorry.
just awesome. Like it I just can't wait to see whenever it finally comes down to Marcone versus Dresden. And word of this is probably going to get back to Dresden.
Well, the other thing with that, because yeah, he explicitly says at the end of this story, yeah, this wasn't all this preparation wasn't for the Fomor. That wasn't what I was planning for. I was planning for Dresden. And one interesting thing about that, there's on TV tropes, there's this idea. I think it's like something like the unspoken plan guarantee. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Say that one more time.
It's something like the unspoken plan guarantee.
I haven't seen that page, but I kind of understand what you're getting at.
It's that if the characters talk about what they're planning to do, if they give any kind of detail about the general, like, okay, here's how we're going to go in, here's how we're going to do this, here's how we're going to do that, you know it's going to fail or at least not go down that way. Because if they tell you this is what we're going to do and this is how it's going to go, you do this, you do this, you do that, and then they do it, well, they've kind of already ruined the story because you've gotten a preview and then you've gotten the action, and it's like,
Right. Something has to go wrong for it to be interesting.
right. And so the fact that we saw all of this setup, and the fact that Marcone explicitly said, uh, I was this is a setup for when I have to have a showdown with Harry Dresden. That's not how it's going to happen. And so how it is going to happen is going to have to be something significantly different,
Right.
which is
Because he even realizes, like, he's demonstrated his entire defensive strategy to someone who's a known ally of Dresden.
well,
So not only does he know that this isn't going to work anymore, but he knows he's going to have to be even more prepared.
and the other thing with that, and this is kind of looking ahead to what actually does take place. Looking at the character Harry Dresden, looking at the character Johnny Marcone, regrettably, I'm pretty sure that whenever this does happen, it's going to be on Marcone's terms. Because Marcone is cool and methodical and plans ahead, and Harry Dresden can be poked into action, like can be provoked into action without too much difficulty. And so I think that when you do see this eventually happen, Marcone's at some point going to say, "Okay, I'm not going to have a better time than this. Let's do something that will annoy Dresden enough that he has to act."
Right. And he recognizes that because he actually says, I debated putting a bullet in her head as Justine walks away. And then he says, but decided against it. She had information about my defenses that could leave them vulnerable. And more to the point, she knew that they were effective if she should speak of today's events to Dresden. But then he then goes on to go that, like, yeah, like if he kills her, that confrontation is going to happen now. But by letting her go, he's going to learn the defenses. but he's just used up the defenses.
Right, right. And it's going to take a significant amount of time to, set all this up again, or whatever
Right.
else he has planned
Yeah,
instead.
and an eventual confrontation with Dresden was inevitable, but murdering Justine would guarantee it happened immediately. Yeah.
um,
So that I think was my favorite, and that just makes me really excited with where this series is going to be going.
okay. Bigfoot on campus. Ready?
Okay.
Do you want to go with this one?
Well, for this one, I just really like how having established that Irwin has this like huge reserve of sort of life energy. It's like, okay, well, how would that work with a white court vampire? Not only that, but it's like he's also taking the stuff he's established for like okay, so whenever they first feed, like that victim is going to die, and that's what turns them into like a full-fledged white court vampire. So just taking these two elements and just sort of throwing them together, and then just letting things get out of hand on a ridiculous level, like that was just a lot of fun.
I also think the kind of frame of that story is kind of nice, also, because basically it's set up as Harry telling all of this to a campus security guard who just wants to know what the hell just happened on my campus and why are you in the middle of it. Um,
Yep.
what was It's also kind of the second time we've seen in the books we've seen a white court vampire really let go. This time, I guess involuntarily, but at the same time, like this is the second time we've seen one of them like unleash the full, you know, sexual whammy, and the first time we barely saw it because Harry Dresden realized what was going on. Is like, I gotta get out of here or I'm gonna die. And here he didn't have that option by that point, so that was kind of interesting too. Um, it's like looking at this in reference to the novels, it's also kind of interesting because this is probably the most, like, there's this and there's in which one is it? Is Blood Rights? Is that the one where he's trying to, where they're trying to get the Shroud of Turin?
It might be. It's been a while since I've read
Wait,
a
no,
lot of the earlier ones.
Death
Death
Masks?
Masks?
Yes, Death
It could be
Masks.
Death Masks.
Anyway, but it's between this and that for the most, I think, sexually graphic scene in the Harry Dresden stories so far. If we ever get a story from the point of view of Bob the Skull, that will probably outpace it.
That would be a very strange story.
Which reminds me, there's something else I'm kind of curious about, because what is as of Skin Games, Harry Dresden now has 2 kids, sort of. And the what's her name? There's Maggie. Does the spirit have a name?
I don't remember.
Huh. Okay. But the his youngest, who is not, I was about to say not entirely human, but actually not human at all. The spirit of intellect is described in character, is kind of described in a female kind of way. And I'm kind of wondering whether Harry is going to have some very unpleasant conversations with Bob the Skull about how he deals with his new daughter.
She doesn't seem like Bob's type.
I don't. Well, I mean, we've barely seen her, so
Well,
I don't.
she doesn't have a body, so he probably is not interested, judging from his sort of previous interests.
Yeah, I don't know.
Although apparently his personality is sort of affected by his owner. So yeah, I I think we still have to wait a little bit to see more of how he reacts being owned by Butters.
So that was a. So you think it's possible that was more of an aspect of Harry's character?
Not necessarily a part of Harry's character, but influenced by it. Because apparently, remember when he was owned by Kimmler, he was a very different, very evil individual, and Harry telling him to like sort of get rid of that part, it would created evil Bob.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, like from that we had learned that significant parts of his personality like are determined sort of by who his owner is.
Yeah. Um. Bigfoot on campus. Anything else?
Not particularly.
Um. Okay. Bombshells. Um. One thing I found interesting about this one is it's a very it's especially in comparison with a lot of the other short stories, it's a very Harry Dresden series title. Because it's well, in this case a compound word, but it's two words, and in relation to the story, it has two very distinct meanings.
Yeah.
Because it's the surface meaning, the first meaning evident is, wow, these three really hot girls. And then there's also, oh, holy crap, there's a horrific bomb that might wipe out a significant portion of the population of Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah, like this one it was just fun, and I did think I find it interesting because one of the things about Harry's character, which he recognizes in himself, is that he really wants to like come to the defense of women when they're in trouble. So it's always kind of fun seeing in that universe whenever the women sort of take care of themselves.
Although now, okay, I was a little bit complaining about the portrayal of women in earlier in some of the Dresden Files, especially the physical capabilities of Karen Murphy. But I did find it interesting the way they have it set up in here, because it's three female characters are kind of the lead, but the problem, they don't handle the problem like they're not what some people kind of satirically refer to in some books and TV shows, men with breasts. Like, they don't go in and, oh, we're gonna beat the crap out of these monsters and blow the whole thing up. And they handle it through, well, their first major solution is hey, let's take advantage of our youthful sexuality.
Well, it's not only that, but they recognize an opportunity to use that, so it's almost like more exploiting a weakness.
Yeah, but it's but then there's that, and then when it comes time to act, where there's actual serious conflict, Molly handles it not through like blowing things up, but through like misdirection, turning her enemies against each other, and then getting them to bring in another player entirely who starts beating the crap out of all of them. And I found it enjoyable seeing female characters that seem to be resolving these problems more with that in not as masculine ways.
Yeah, I can see that. And I do think it's interesting to be like, okay, how would Dresden have, addressed this issue? And I feel like it would have not gone nearly as well if Dresden would have been involved. Hey, someone kidnapped your brother. This is where he's being held.
Well, it's see, the other thing with that though is Harry, because what's her not Mab,
Leia.
Leah tricks Molly into going into this. And I'm not saying they couldn't fool Harry, because it's kind of part of what they do. At the same time, Harry's been dealing with the Fae, quite a bit longer, and he has a better idea how they think. So I wonder if they would have successfully been able to get him involved at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just a really fun story, and seeing it from a different character's point of view, and also seeing a group of characters that you don't see a lot working together, like as like the leads pull it off. That was a lot of fun. And then one thing I liked about this whole book is seeing more into the whole Fomar conflict,
Right.
because we heard people like discuss it with Harry, I think, but I don't think we saw nearly as much about it in the like normal novels.
Well, and the another thing with this story, oh shoot, I had it and I lost it. You also see just a little bit more into the unpleasant life Molly was leading in between changes and cold days.
Yeah.
And just, and it's really weird because it started out with that, and then like a large part of the story is almost entirely the other direction. But it started out, and you saw just a little bit of, okay, I'm homeless and I'm a fugitive from magical justice, and I'm also trying to be, trying to fill some very, very big shoes as the magical protector of this area. And this was kind of referenced. This was talked about in Ghost Story,
Right.
but like again, you see just a little bit more of that, and it's kind of painful. And what was crud? I feel like there was one other thing I had about this. Okay. Anything else for this one?
I don't think so.
Cold Case. Why don't you start?
Oh man. Yeah, like the story as a whole is very interesting, but the stuff that it reveals about the universe as a whole, and then that ending,
Okay. Yeah,
it's
that's a.
it's like that's a bombshell in and of itself. But being able to see Molly sort of adjust to her role, and just sort of learning more about how the Winter Court operates, that was really nice. And then at the end, we already saw a little bit of the outer gates. We already knew the situation was bad, but this just told us so much about why the Winter Court is what it is. Like, they pretty much exist to fight this war by doing pretty much whatever they can. So
Well,
even the sort of stuff that goes like outside of the Dresden Files universe, about sort of like elves and fairies and stuff like that, and like sort of the like sexual aspects of that. Like this puts all that in a new context, and it's like, man, that is freaking terrible.
Well,
It's
and the
like,
other
whew.
thing, let's see, yeah, a couple of things. It's interesting to me that it kind of, in the first Inside Jobs, we learn about the Oblivion Wars,
Yes,
which is basically, what is it? Non-humans trying to wipe out a bunch of like hostile, hostile gods, hostile like supernatural forces by making sure that no humans know about them at all. And by the nature of that, they can't get humans involved. Um, and so, but then in this one, you see, um, you know, uh, you see just a little bit of that because basically, what they're dealing with here, these servants of Cthulhu, um, are what happens when the Oblivion Wars are failing, you know, and because if they could make everybody forget about this creature, he wouldn't be able to influence people. But now a lot of people know, and he's gaining power, and that's a
Eh,
real problem.
thanks a lot, Lovecraft.
Have you read any of the Lovecraft stories, by the way?
No,
It's you should sometime. They are interesting. Um, but
but yeah, publishing the stories was the right move for, like, say, vampires. But for the sort of Lovecraftian monsters, that's exactly what you do not want to do.
um,
And I don't know if you read it, but there's actually a Dresden Files comic where they sort of have another like eldritch horror thing that Dresden has to protect. But yeah, that one, the thing actually does escape, and it's just like destroys a little bit of the countryside. That one was interesting.
and then there's there's actually a lot in this story because there's Molly taking up her new duties, then her finding out what those duties mean, which is, yay, we rescued these children, and now we're going to take them away from their parents for years, possibly forever.
No, I think it's pretty clearly forever. I feel like whoever gets sent off to the outer gates, they're pretty much there until they die in battle. Otherwise, there would be a lot more individuals around that knew about what was going on. If you finished your term and then went back home, to begin with, they're losing somebody who is experienced enough to survive for any decent amount of time. And then that also means everybody back home is going to be hearing that story.
Well, and then there's the like logistical thing of, okay, so this is given what they're facing, this is what they have to do. They don't really have a better option. At the same time, you have to leave some people behind because you know, there have to be people to have more kids at some point. And so like trying to figure out the logistics, like do they take, the children every like X years and then the next set you get to keep. It's like trying to figure out that because it sounded like she would take like all of them, and so and it actually and I don't know if Dresden had this in mind. It actually reminded me a little bit of the historic, which I don't know too much about them. I know that they existed. The real historical army called the Janissaries. Do you know who those were?
I'm familiar with the name, but I don't know a lot of details.
Um, if I'm correct, this would be in the Ottoman Empire, and basically they were the children of Christians in this Muslim empire, who the sons who were taken, at a very young age and basically trained up as soldiers for this, aggressive Muslim empire. And it reminds me of that, and it's like that idea is just horrifying on so many levels. Because, like in this story, not only are your kids being taken from you, which I'm a parent, and I I can't think of it's hard to think of something more horrifying. But not only are your kids being taken from you, your kids are being taken from you and trained in the ideology of the people who took them, and trained as soldiers to conquer, the other people of your culture, of your religion. And it's just like how much horrific, like stacking all of that up together is just amazingly anyway.
Yeah, well, for the Winter Court though, it's a good thing that what they're doing is like for the good of everyone else,
Right. Yeah,
because
it's
we discover that the Winter Queen's like that the law is pretty much ingrained in every individual under her.
yeah, and so it's and so like this isn't quite as bad in that case, because like at some level they understand why this has to be done, and they even if they hate it, like they understand what's going on. But it reminded me of that a little bit. Um, there's there's a little bit of that, what I referred to earlier. Sometimes you have to do it on your own, and Molly kind of explicitly says this, like, yeah, I could call in help,
Yep.
and then I would be held in contempt by the rest of the Winter Court for the rest of my term of service, which could be several hundred years, maybe thousands of years. And so there's that. Give me a second. Oh, and then there's, like you said, the ending, which is, oi, that's rough.
Yeah, Ramirez is always fun when he shows up, and he didn't deserve that. But like, not only that, but just the physical pain, the emotional pain, and then once he gets over that, the sheer embarrassment. Just yeah, poor Ramirez.
Well, and then also the other thing, like, for, Molly or anyone else in her role, um, basically you're a monk, kind of sworn to celibacy, which is not just sworn to, but pretty nastily enforced. Unless you're a complete psychopath, like, it's not going to take long before you take that pretty seriously. But not only that, you also, have your, libido, cranked up to, 20, turned up to 11, but,
It's
more
like
than 11.
yeah, like supernaturally high.
And so it's like, that does not sound like a fun life. That,
Yeah, at the same time, though, uh, Mab's sort of explanation of like enduring what she forces upon her subjects is like you can appreciate that to a certain degree, but at the same time, like her mantle doesn't have to protect herself against the same thing. Like it's pretty much like Molly's like the only one that has this enforced against her.
well, I actually don't know, because okay, it's what is it, Maiden, Mother, and Crone,
Yes.
and I don't know what the implications of Crone are in this. Um, but yeah. Anyway, it's
Now,
yeah that
now for the queens at least, there are counterparts with the kings, right? Because is
very
like not as important, but don't they?
there should be. No, I hadn't thought about that before, but like I mean,
I
Harry took the names from what it from of some of them from Shakespeare,
yes,
and there's in Midsummer Night's Dream, there's Titania and there's Oberon.
right. But I think one of them is like the leader of the Wild Hunt, isn't he?
The Earl
Can,
King?
oh, okay, that's a different character.
Yeah, that's a different. Like he's.
Okay,
Um,
I seem to vaguely recall some mention of a counterpart,
I don't
but
know anything about that. I'm not saying you're wrong. I can't. I'm not aware of it.
yeah, I don't think they factored very large in the stories. But that could be interesting to see something about that later on. But at any rate, like for the role of like Mother and Crone, there's like no necessarily like rule against physical intimacy, whereas for the maiden role, it's kind of required.
Yeah,
So
it's.
on the on the other hand, if Molly does succeed in finding some new way to deal with the situation, which seems unlikely considering this has been going on for practically forever, but if she could, then that could possibly be her way out.
Well, if she again, yeah, on Jim Butcher would have to write a very convincing story to sell that because you're dealing with a problem that's been going on for longer than humans really have a comprehension of,
Yeah,
and
it's one of the sort of foundational aspects of that universe.
so for someone new to come along and say, "Hey, have you tried X?" and everyone's like, no," like you would have to be very convincing selling that idea for people to take it seriously. Um, but well, and then if they did, then it seems to me like that how that would work out is they could turn down the sex drive, but Molly would still pretty much be the maiden and all that implies. So, um, cold case. Anything else?
I don't believe so.
Um, jury duty. I'll be honest. I don't have too much to say on this one. I didn't dislike it. I don't know.
Yeah, it was one of the ones that was just a fun little read, but didn't really like add a whole lot. Just sort of filled in some holes that you might have like wondered about here or there, but nothing too pressing.
Um, so talking about other viewpoint characters, day one, and we get to see Waldo Butters. Not only Waldo Butters, we get to see Knight of the Cross, Waldo Butters, in action for the first time. Because the conclusion of okay, there's a couple things here, and this is one thing I liked about this book in general. The last three stories, Jury Duty, Day One, and Zoo Day, all take place after the events of Skin Game. So that's kind of interesting in and of itself. Like even, so these are advancing the narrative past things we've already seen. And then, like I said, Waldo Butters in action for the first time because at the end of Skin Game, all he actually does pretty much is draw the sword.
Yeah, he discovers that he's been chosen.
But you don't actually and it's cool. Like how that resolves is pretty cool. At the same time, like he doesn't actually have to do anything past existing at that point to resolve the problem. He is a knight. He is the knight of the cross. He is a knight of the cross, armed with the sword that Nicodemus had thought he had gotten rid of,
Yep.
and that alone, Nicodemus was like, we gotta go. Bye. So, there wasn't anything in action there. So this is
Yeah, for someone that like technically achieved his goal, he didn't really end up in a very good position at the end of Skin Game.
Well, the other thing was he achieved his stated goal, but Harry says, okay, this is what he says he was going after, but it's quite likely that there was something else.
Right.
And so if his stated goal was not all he cared about, he probably didn't get anything else.
Yeah.
And he paid a pretty bad cost for that. So, including at least one of the coins may be effectively shut off. Like, they can get them from however, the church had been locking them away. They can get them out of that containment. I don't know if they can retrieve them from Hades' vault.
Now, did he leave the coin there? I seem to recall him wrapping it up and like slipping it in his jacket.
No, he has Deidre's. He has Deidre's. At least one of them was killed there.
Okay, it's been a while since I read that.
Yeah, well, because it's the girl Hannah Asher.
That sounds right.
Right. Okay, it's Hannah Asher is killed there. I'm not 100% sure what happened to the Sasquatch guy. But I'm not sure if he was killed there or if he managed to make it out. But at least
Goodman
one of them.
Gray?
What's that?
Goodman Gray?
No. He was not one of the. He did not have one of the coins.
Right. I'm sorry. It's been a while since I read it. You see, one good thing about this book is just getting more Dresden Files. For a while, they were coming out pretty regularly. Now it seems like it's been forever since we had the last one.
Well, and Jim Butcher has also been working on other, projects, other series. So that's part of the reason, I'm sure. But no, there was Hannah Asher had Lashiel's coin, which then Harry got to deal with two people who hated him for entirely different reasons wrapped up into one. And then I don't remember the character's name. The other Bigfoot or Bigfoot-esque character. I'm not sure if he actually was. There seemed to be some confusion. It didn't seem to be 100% clear. But he also had one of the coins. But I'm not sure how far out he made it and whether he would be able to escape entirely or not.
But yeah, seeing Butters finally get to really do something was pretty great.
Yeah, and this is one of the things when I read through the first time, I was thinking about this story. I sometimes feel kind of like frustrated or ambivalent with the stories about the Knights of the Cross, because like there is this thing about them. There's this like God's got it under control, and God is there, is on our side, period. And I'm like, I wish I'm a Christian and I believe that, but at the same time, sometimes it so much feels like, you're just out there on your own, and it's like seeing it put in this kind of put in these kind of stories, it's almost painful sometimes because it's like oh.
Well,
And I'm not saying that's bad. Like that's not my point at all. But
well, the thing I like about the Knights of the Cross in these stories is it's not made easy for them. It's just made possible.
right, yes,
Like
that's
they're
definitely true
pretty
as well.
much put on just like a relatively even playing field compared to if they weren't a knight. And like in some ways, like yeah, God's gonna look out for them. There are angels keeping an eye on things. Like, but when it comes down to it, they're still the ones that have to act. They have to make the decisions. It's not like when a Knight of the Cross wins a victory. It's not cheap. It wasn't
Right.
handed to them. And I like how when he even calls Harry for help, like Harry just knows, nope, you got to do this. You're on your own.
Yeah, it's but yeah, and just looking at this story in and of itself, it's pretty fun, and I definitely like this one, and seeing how he eventually solves it, um, it's definitely cool seeing Knight Waldo Butters in action. So
And you see, this was a fun story, and it also opened up the universe in a big way because we actually like get to see stuff from the point of view of a Knight of a Cross, and then we learn that yeah, this is specific for him because like each Knight of the Cross, like just the way Butters gets the video game prompts, like, and that's just sort of how it works for him. It's like yeah, God's speaking to him in a way that he like inherently understands, and for him that means video games. Like that's just a lot of fun there.
yeah, um, let's see. Uh, so to the last story, Zoo Day, which in a weird way, I think maybe the best of the set. I think Jim Butcher closed on a high note here.
I really think so because the story itself is really simple. In fact, like the three stories, the three views of the same story, are in themselves very simple. But the way they're all like intertwined together is just done very nicely.
Yeah, there's I call it parallel storytelling, where you see um, the same story, the same set of events from over and over again from different points of view, which the only other place I can think of where it's done roughly like this would be with Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game and then Ender's Shadow, which is a novel which tells most of the same events of Ender's Game from a different point of view. Um,
Yeah, they tried it for the for television, Netflix with Arrested Development. I think season 4, but it didn't actually work very well. So they went back and had to re-edit it to sort of like take that away.
right.
But yeah, it's not something easy to pull off well.
And okay, and so we see Harry attempting to have a simple day out with Maggie and with Mouse, and then each of them in turn is confronted with a serious supernatural threat, and how they deal with that each in turn is it's yeah, like I said, it's a really interesting story. It
Well,
also
I think it also like the threat they're facing for each one is more or less a shadow of themselves. So for Mouse, it's pretty easy. He's meeting actually like one of his brothers who is trained to basically be his evil opposite. for Harry, we have him meeting like a young warlock who's just like struggling with their powers and isn't sure what to do. And for Maggie, it's maybe not as explicit, but she's still dealing with like kids her own age that are sort of like dealing with stuff outside of themselves, which she's taken a lot of like sort of psychic emotional damage over the time, and she's kind of having to like face off against something else like that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah. I hadn't thought of that before, but yeah, I do see what you're saying. Well, and then another thing, for me on top of that is, and this is going to be, I think this is going to be kind of difficult for Butcher to manage going forward, because Harry wants to just be a dad today, and he wants to be able to focus on his daughter, and then okay, you got to go do this other thing. There's this other problem, and like Butcher says in the introduction to this story, like I hadn't considered, when I started these events in motion, like how much this is going to change the character and change the story, and the story going forward, with Harry, trying to actually be a father, is going to be it's going to be interesting to see how he manages that. And yeah, Harry, confronts this young, bad attitude, probably accidental warlock, which is more or less what he himself was at one point. So yeah, I hadn't considered that aspect of it.
Well, not only that, but it's also you have Mouse's brother like actively trying to make the situation worse, like actively trying to influence him towards evil.
Well, and the other thing, you find out, just a little bit more about what is it, Foo dogs?
Right.
You find out a little bit more about what they can do, which apparently is something on the order of just a general projection of luck, I guess.
Which I believe was hinted at earlier, but it was nice seeing that more or less, well, explicitly. But yeah, so kind of the what we had started talking about a little bit earlier, just the sort of general idea of there are these things that the kids have to deal with that the adults have no idea is even there. Like even Mouse has trouble noticing them and has to like kind of be warned that they're there. I can't see a lot of that being used going forward, just because even the kids realize that they will sound crazy if they mention this to an adult.
Well, and then also, apparently Molly had a book that covered all of this that got passed on to her younger siblings that has then been passed on to Maggie. And then it's like, well, where did this book come from? Like, was this just like Molly's own notes about the problem? Or was this something actually like written down at some point, but like just a ton of questions?
Right. But yeah, like the book was mentioned to like be by the Carpenter kids.
Okay.
But the thing about it is like they would have each like added it a little bit, but it's like we still don't necessarily know who started it. Just that they contributed. But yeah, it was a neat little thing. I don't feel like it's going to come up a lot more. If he can work it into the future stories, that would be neat. But you would really need a kid protagonist for that.
Now that I think about it, I'm actually kind of going the other way on this. I think now that he's brought this up, and if Harry's going to be a part of Maggie's life, and if Harry is a wizard, I feel like you're going to see some of this. It might not be the whole story, but I don't know.
If it was a problem that needed to be solved, I could see it coming back later, but it's pretty much accepted this is part of growing up, learning how to deal with these things, learning how to stand up to them. Because like even Mouse realizes he can't get involved to any like large degree. Like he could try to subtly influence, take away some of the negative energy, but he still has to let Maggie deal with it herself.
Well, but the other thing with that is we don't know what else is in that book. We don't know what other, kid-specific threats might be talked about, and what other kind of things, and whether some of those are of a much more serious nature. So I don't know. Whew.
I do have to say there is one thing that disappointed me with this story.
Okay.
Okay, so starts off, it's narrated by Dresden. It's like, okay, this is a normal story. Then you see it from Maggie's perspective. Oh, that's cool. I didn't see that coming. Then you see it from Mouse's perspective. Wow, I really didn't see that coming. Okay, I would have loved just one more where it was by his cat, and it's his cat just chilling somewhere, completely unrelated to anything else that happened.
I see. I get you there. Like in terms of like story structure, I get what you're going for there, and I don't. I find the idea amusing. At the same time, though, the way he did wrap it up, like it's very, like there's a very emotional closure feeling to Mouse's story. That if you did something else after that, it would kind of. It seems like it would kind of damage that.
Maybe. I just feel like that was a missed opportunity.
What? Where is Mister anyway?
The last I remember him specifically is him running away from the house in, I think it was Changes. But
Yeah, he escaped.
yeah, when everything was burning down. I
Oh,
don't. Have we seen him
Murphy.
since then?
Murphy.
Murphy has him. Okay.
Murphy has him. That was established in Ghost Stories.
Okay, that sounds right. I really need to go back and reread those. Like, I don't reread a lot of books, but I have gone back and reread the first 3 Dresden Files books, I think. These are stories that I can go back and reread.
Okay. Well, I think we covered this one pretty well. Was there anything else you wanted to put in?
Not particularly.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me today, and we're going to close off. God be with you.
Have a good one.